Hello, good morning. Today, the eyes of the world are fixed on Geneva, where the third round of high-stakes, indirect talks between the United States and Iran will get underway. But this isn't your typical diplomatic summit. While Omani mediators shuffle between rooms, the Persian Gulf is filling with American steel. Warships and aircraft deployed by President Trump in a clear deal or strike ultimatum. So we ask, is this third round in Geneva a genuine bridge to peace, or just a procedural formality before the bad things Trump promised begin to happen? And as the Pentagon warns of a conflict far more complex than Iraq, is Washington gambling with a region that no longer sees the world through an American lens? I'm Mark Summers, and this is In Focus. The atmosphere in Geneva is described as neither war nor peace. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has invoked Ayatollah Khamenei's religious decree against nuclear weapons as a shield, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio has moved the goalposts, calling Iran's refusal to discuss its ballistic missile program a big problem. With the US carrier strike groups in position, the diplomatic clock is ticking against the backdrop of public skepticism at home. A recent AP NORC poll shows that while Americans fear a nuclear Iran, half of the country doubts President Trump's judgment when it comes to the use of military force. And joining us to navigate this geopolitical minefield is Meha Nicholas Fursley, Director of the EU ASEAN Centre. Thank you very much for being here with us this morning, Nick. So Marco Rubio is now insisting that ballistic missiles be part of the nuclear deal. Do you think this is a strategic necessity for US security? Or is that, we know that the Israelis have been pushing for it, or is this maybe a poison pill designed to make the Geneva talks fail?
I'm delighted to join you today from sunny Valencia in eastern Spain.
We're all jealous about that.
It's complicated. So I don't think, Marco Rubio is in there to trick the Iranians or make the talks fail. Because quite honestly, of course, in diplomacy, both sides lie politely within limits, right? If they're sincere about reaching a deal, a middle-of-the-road solution, or they both lie in extreme ways because their goal is not to reach a deal, right? So I don't want to do like psychology or game theory, but I think Marco Rubio is fairly sincere here. And I think quite honestly, it's no surprise for the Iranians. I'll tell you why, because in May, early June of last year, so just, 9-10 months ago, there were direct and secret talks between the Trump White House and the Iranians. So all that Iranian, discourse about, the need for indirect talks earlier was a lie, because of course in May of last year, they were talking very directly. And one of the 5 issues they talked about was ballistic missiles, right? So today, they can't really say that they're surprised or shocked. I think the Iranians are lying more than the Americans here, if you want.
Okay, and just to bring Oman in for a second, once again the silent partner mediating these indirect talks. And given your work in these kind of arenas, what is it about Oman that makes it a state that both Washington and Tehran manage to trust to carry out these negotiations?
Very good question. And actually, to reach a deal, so once again, if both sides are sincere about the necessity to reach a deal, which means a dirty middle-of-the-road solution, which will avoid war, but it's better to avoid war and reach the middle of the road. So both sides have to make concessions. Of course, here, the bigger concessions will have to be made by Iran, but America will need to make some small concessions on the economic and financial front. Oman is very palatable to both sides because they are ibadi. They are ibadi Shiite slides. They're kind of, moderate Shiites. Ethnically, even though they are Qahtani, so they are of Southern Arabian origin, they've intermarried with Indians and Iranians over the past 3,000 years. So there is a cultural, ethnic, religious proximity. And it's true, they are bona fide or bona fide moderates. So the Omani Sultanate or kingdom has pursued a centrist, centrist Anglophile, and now relatively pro-American policy, whilst simultaneously preserving their Shiite-light Ibadi traditions. So they are in the middle naturally, and I think that's why they can be trusted to some extent by both parties.
Okay, and let's get into the details then. President Pezeshkian has been saying, of course, that Iran is not seeking a nuclear weapon. It has never sought a nuclear weapon, and is leaning heavily on the fatwa on nukes. In the world of international relations, does a religious decree like this carry any weight?
Not much, not much. I'll tell you why. Because Imam, Grand Ayatollah Dr. Imam Ruhollah al-Khomeini himself used the fatwa thing in a theatrical fashion. The most eloquent example was 2 weeks before signing a peace deal with Saddam Hussein, he famously said, I think it was in November 1988, that it's easier for him to do like Plato, because in Shiite Iranian culture, Greek philosophy plays a big part. So he was saying, it's easier for me to do like Plato, or do like Plato says that Socrates did, and Socrates is alleged to have drunk, poison before dying. So he was saying, it's easier for me to drink poison like Socrates than to sign a peace treaty with Saddam Hussein. And, 12 days later, he signed a peace treaty with Saddam Hussein. So it's all theater, it's all theatrics with the mullahs and hypocrisy, in Arabic, al-batiniya. The word button plays an important part in Shiite Iranian culture. In Arabic, button means belly. So when you hide something inside your belly, you're lying to the others. So al-batiniya, the art of lying, is actually a cornerstone of Iranian culture.
And Tehran calls Trump's claims about their missile range big lies. Not something that Trump, doesn't do from time to time. Does the international community buy what the U.S. intelligence and what Trump's selling?
Well, the thing is, discussing the nuclear issue, so discussing the potential military usage of nuclear energy generation, right? Discussing it without discussing the vector. The vector is the instrument you use to send it over to the enemy, right? A missile is really a mute theological Platonic discussion, because of course they go together, right? So the reason why nuclear generation or enrichment is dangerous potentially is you can put it inside a ballistic missile and lob it onto Saudi Arabia or Israel or whoever. So of course, naturally, if you are serious about discussing it, you discuss it jointly, together, right, in conjunction. So when the Iranians say, oh, no, it's a completely different issue, of course, they are lying theatrically. But I'll tell you what, personally, my personal belief is all that is secondary for the Trump White House. So even the nuclear enrichment and the ballistic missile, they're not the main issue. I think the main issues in the eyes of Trump are twofold. Number one, China. So they don't want China to put the Chinese and the Indians to put their hands onto the immense, but untapped, largely untapped rare earth and uranium deposits in Iran. There are massive untapped. Why are they untapped? Because of the corruption and decay of the Iranian regime. I mean, the average age of decision makers today in Tehran is 82 or 83. It's ridiculous, right? So it's a gerontocracy, corrupt, incompetent. And there are sanctions, and of course, international sanctions don't help. But basically, there's a huge rare earth mining potential in Iran, untapped. I think the Americans don't want China to put their hands on it because, of course, these rare earth minerals are essential for AI. Microchips. Microchips. The whole AI industry requires them. There's also a lot of untapped natural gas resources, and the Americans don't want the Chinese to take them. So I think that's the number one issue, opening up the Iranian market. Trump is a businessman, you said it. So he wants, American miners, American energy companies to go there and exploit these untapped resources. And there's a second issue, which I think is more important than nuclear and ballistic missiles. It's Iraq. Because of George W. Bush and Tony Blair, because of the stupidity and incompetence of George W. Bush and Tony Blair, and back then they were allied with the Israeli government, the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's party. They have put in power in Baghdad pro-Iranian Shiite radical politicians. And they've had some ups and downs in the past 23 years. But to make a long story short, 2 weeks ago,
I think we've just lost you for a second there, Nick. We'll get you back. We lost your audio. Can you hear me there, Nick? Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and ask you the question about this AP poll. Actually, I'll just check. Nick, can you hear me? Oh, we have Nick back with us now. Now the AP poll shows low trust. I'm going to come to the American side of things. It shows low trust in Trump's military judgment. Of course, we've just had the State of the Union this week, and we've had the lowest polls as well for Trump that he has had. Do you think the fact that he's quite weak domestically and the confidence of the American public in him when it comes to these foreign adventures is so low? Does this weaken the president's hand when it comes to what options he has?
Yes and no. Weak polls are relative. So I think, today Trump's polls are mediocre. They're not great. But I think, his enemies in America and Europe are framing it as something horrible. In reality, if you compare, apples and apples, the favorability, the positive opinion polls on Trump today are more than double what they are for Keir Starmer in London and Emmanuel Macron in Paris. Now, the benchmark, Keir Starmer and Macron are not a high benchmark, but I'm saying that most Western governments are unpopular today, essentially for economic and social reasons. The middle class, the working class is angry in most countries in Europe and North America. I think Trump's polls are not bad, they're just mediocre. And I think that Trump is doing it regardless of the polls because it's part of his legacy. Once again, he knows that he even if the Republicans win, so even if in 6 months when they have the midterms elections, he knows that he will be perceived as lame duck because of the way American politics is structured. So he knows that all the great things, all the big things he will do in his second term, he will do in the first 15, 18 months of his second term. So he knows he still has 6 or 7 months to make his mark. And I think he's focusing on that. Once again, I don't know, I'm sorry for that. I think the communication was cut. I was saying China is the main issue in Iran. So when it comes to Iran, the main issue is the access to rare earth minerals, uranium, and natural gas for American companies, not Chinese companies. That's the number one issue for him. And another issue for him, much more important than ballistic missiles and uranium, is the Iranian control of the Iraqi government. That's unacceptable for the Trump White House. So I think he wants to sort out these two issues forcefully in the coming days. I think if the Iranians don't make the necessary concessions, they will find that he means business and is willing to hit them hard.
Now, if this third round ends without a favorable outlook, as Pezeshkian is hoping for. Does this U.S. military buildup make a strike inevitable by the weekend? And of course, Trump gave that 2-week deadline, which he did also last June, and then began strikes very, very quickly within that 2-week deadline. Some people think that he was just getting the State of the Union out of the way, and now this weekend is when the strikes will begin. What's your view?
Yes, it's also, logistics. He needed to have both the Gerald Ford and Abraham Lincoln aircraft carriers near Iran. I think it will take another 24 hours, but in less than a day, both will be fully in position. So I think this is when he will give them, I think, one last ultimatum, and they will need to make tangible concessions. So tangible is not propaganda, because the Iranians are very good at propaganda. I know, let's put it frankly, I'm not saying that people in Europe or the New York Times or CNN, they like the theology of Ruhollah al-Khomeini, but so many thought leaders and journalists and politicians in America, even inside Trump's own party, right? And even more so in Europe, they don't like Trump. So they're willing to give Iran the benefit of the doubt out of hatred for Trump. But what I'm coming at, I think Trump is quite focused, very focused actually. And if they don't make concessions rapidly, yes, I think it's going to hit them very hard, very hard. And unlike what most experts say, I think it has nothing to do, or very little to do, with the national security of Israel, or even with nuclear and ballistic, issues. I think the main issues are really China's control of Iran's resources, the New Silk Road, Iran being at the heart of China's New Silk Road, immense untapped uranium and natural earth resources, very important in the AI Cold War between Beijing and Washington, and also getting rid of the Shiite pro-Iranian politicians in Baghdad. I think the Iranians will need to make clear concessions on that front. And the clearest of all concessions is removing Nouri al-Maliki. Today, Nouri al-Maliki is the official candidate to be the next Iraqi prime minister in Baghdad. He's corrupt, he's very pro-Iranian, and I think it's a provocation. So having nominated Nouri al-Maliki once again for that role is an anti-American, anti-Western provocation. I think if the Iranians don't remove Nouri al-Maliki in the coming hours, I think it's going to be a big casus belli, a reason for Trump to hit them very hard.
Okay, and of course, another thing that Trump will be accused of course, if he does go ahead and commit to strikes at the weekend, is trying to get the Epstein files off the front pages. There's been several very serious accusations leveled at him in the last few days, and I think the American public will think it may be another Trump distraction, but it will remain to be seen. Nick, stay with us. We're going to move on to, well, from the diplomatic table to the actual theatre of war in just a few seconds. The rhetoric coming out of Washington feels like a remix of 2003, but the geography tells a different story. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq, home to 90 million people, and possesses a security architecture, the IRGC, for example, that is as much an economic empire as a military force. The warnings are stark. Yemen to Lebanon. And perhaps most surprisingly, the regional support Washington enjoyed in 2003 when they went into Iraq has evaporated. Many Arab governments now view the hegemonic ambitions of Israel as a more immediate threat to Tehran's nuclear program. Nick, back with you. The Pentagon is warning that Iran is not Iraq, and they're using that as a way of trying to perhaps warn Trump what could be about to go wrong, even worse than what went wrong with the invasion of Iraq. So why do you think the comparison to 2003 and the invasion is something that they want to use to warn US planners of today?
Actually, it's a cruel irony. It's a very cruel irony. It shows that, you don't control the media narrative if 70, 80% of the journalists hate you. And that's exactly what Trump is faced with. Why am I saying it? Because it's true that Iraq is the benchmark. So what happened in the Gulf precisely, 23 years ago is a very good benchmark. And actually, Trump, back then, when he was a businessman, far from the world of politics, back then, if you remember, in 2003, 90% of US voters supported Bush, supported the idea of bombing Baghdad and removing Saddam Hussein and giving power in Iraq, delivering Iraq on a silver plate to the Iranian Islamist regime. That's George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Tony Blair who did all of that. And they did it on false pretense, on fabricated, fake proofs, right? That happened 23 years ago, and there was a businessman, a construction, real estate entrepreneur named young Donald Trump, and he was opposed to it back then. And back then, 90% of US public opinion was in favor. So what I'm coming at is Trump is completely different from Bush, Cheney, John McCain, and Tony Blair. He's not a neocon.
But he might be about to do something that could be even worse for the region here in the Middle East, of course.
Maybe, but I think not, because unlike people like, Bush and Tony Blair, if you'll notice, he's not insisting on exporting Jeffersonian democracy to Central Asia. He made a few token statements about, not killing student demonstrators, but he never said that he wanted to plant the seeds of American or Israeli, quote unquote, democracy in Iran. He couldn't care less, right? And also, he never said that he wanted to send boots on the ground. He opposes being an Nixonian, Theodore Rooseveltian, American nationalist. Yes, he believes in gunboat diplomacy, but no, he's against the idea of, remodeling Iran along Western lines, sending American troops on the ground in the heart of Iranian cities, right? Like Bush did.
True, but he has said that regime change would be something that would be best for Iran, and that he would like that to happen. But unlike, of course, Saddam's conventional army that he had, in Iran, of course, there's the Iranian Republican Guard. And they're embedded into the economy, into regional proxies as well. So if the US strikes, can this surgical air power actually degrade a force that has been designed to be sometimes invisible and asymmetric? I mean, is that a way that they could go about it without putting boots on the ground?
Yes, as long as he hits them very hard. And today, he has the firepower, he has the capacity to hit them very hard. And let's look at the technological gap, right? So in the year, in March 2003, let's say that, the technological gunpowder gap between Iraq and America was 4x or 5x, even though American propaganda was telling us that the elite Republican Guard in Baghdad and Mosul was embedded, and Saddam Hussein had the fourth army in the world, etc. So let's say the difference between the two armies was 3 or 4x. Today, the difference between the Iranian and the US armed forces is 20 times X. So that the gap has expanded dramatically. One of the reasons is tech. American technology has gone immense progress in the past 20, 25 years. So I think it's going to hit them hard, very hard, if they don't make tangible concessions. And I think Russia will look the other way. I think there's only one red line for the Russians. It is the northern provinces of Iran, because they are near Russia's border, and Russia has very important, vital strategic interests around the Caspian Sea. And actually, ethnically, the Iranian Shiites of northern Iran, near the Caspian Sea, they are partly of Russian, Georgian origin, even though they're Muslims. So Russia has some, ethnic, cultural, geographic, military influence in northwestern Iran, around the Caspian Sea, and there are two or three provinces which I think Russia considers that it's quote unquote their zone of influence. So they would never leave America approach that area, and I think Trump doesn't care. So I think Trump doesn't want to take these Caspian bordering
Oh, he
Iranian.
wouldn't want to upset his friend in Moscow, would he? Either, I guess. I mean, let's come to Moscow and Beijing then. If the U.S. does begin to strike Iran, what are Russia and China going to do about it, if anything?
So I think Russia will do nothing. Now China will be very upset, very very upset, because the Chinese in the past 20 years have invested trillions of dollars every year to build the new Silk Road. That gigantic, it's not only about, high-speed rail and highways and airports and ports. It's much more than that, connecting Guangdong and Hong Kong and Shanghai to Budapest, Athens, and Rome, right? And Iran is at the center of the new Silk Road. And if, quote unquote, Iran is neutralized, or if, even worse for the Chinese, Iran leaves the sort of global South camp and joins the Western camp or pro-American camp or whatever, I think for the Chinese, it will be an immense setback. And I think Trump's timing is good here because had America waited 1 or 2 more years, it would have been impossible for them to do it. Today, there's an opening because Russia, of course, is busy with Ukraine. Russia has a secret deal with Trump, about partitioning Central Asia into spheres of influence. So as long as the Russian sphere is not harmed, they couldn't care less about what happened.
Okay. Well, and just before we go, we've got a few minutes left, and this is going to be right up your street. You're going to be straight back into your favourite Bush and Blair diatribe for us, Nick. The UK has refused, reportedly, to let the US use its bases for strikes on Iran. This is unheard of, I think, in the relationship between the US and UK. What does this know from Washington's closest allies say about the international legitimacy of the campaign, if it does say anything?
Well, it tells you one thing, neoconservatism may be quasi-extinct in Washington, D.C., but it's alive and well in Paris, Berlin, and London, right? And the whole Lord Mendelssohn affair is not surprising because the Blairite project, just like the Ukraine project, just like the Blairite project, it's like the Zelensky project or the Macron project. They're all extension or ramifications of that neocon ideology. And so, of course, for the neocons, what Trump is doing is something disgusting. It's bad. So opposing him is good. So, the Chagos Island actually, and also beyond Blair and Bush, the Chagos Island issue is connected to China because what the Brits are doing now, they are on the verge of ceding the Chagos Island to Mauritius, and the government of
with it on lease, with Diego Garcia
yes,
on lease, the
yes,
base there, yeah,
yes,
for
yes, but
100 years.
the government of Mauritius is actually a very pro-Chinese, one of the most pro-Chinese governments on the face of the earth. So there you have it. It's ceding a strategic asset, both civilian and military, in the heart of the, connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Arabian Peninsula and to Africa, ceding it to China effectively. So to make a long story short, of course, Trump is angry and rightly so, and he perceives it as something bad, and he's being stabbed in the back by the remnants of the neocon Bush-Blair era, and there are sadly many of them in Europe today. So the whole Chagos, the San Diego, the Diego Garcia, so the Diego Garcia Air Base, and the whole Chagos Island issue is a signal, just like the indictment, just like what happened to Lord Mendelssohn. It's a signal that the Blairites and the Bushites are very strong in Europe today.
Okay. Well, we're just out of time, Nick. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy Valencia and hope it's very nice and sunny for you. Miha, Nicola, firstly, thank you very much for being here with us on the program. As always, it's a pleasure. In Geneva, they are talking about big lies and religious decrees. In the Gulf, they are talking about surgical strikes and asymmetric warfare. But for the people of the region, the memory of 2003 isn't history, it's a warning. As we wait for the results of this third round of talks, the question isn't just whether Iran will blink. The question is whether Washington is prepared for what happens if they don't. I'm Mark Summers, and this has been In Focus.